Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. So one of the hardest things about being a software developer is that there's so much to learn, and it can be difficult to try and work out what you should be learning. So I've created this roadmap with everything that I think you should be learning to become a backend developer. I'm not going to be able to cover everything today that's in this roadmap, so I've included a link in the description to the roadmap on my website. The roadmap is interactive. You can click on the individual items and it will give you some more information about them. I'm going to be expanding this roadmap over time to give you more information about what you should be learning, as well as particular resources to help you as well. So the first part of this roadmap is what I call general knowledge. It's the things that I think every developer should know, but surprisingly a lot of developers don't. I think a lot of us go into learning a particular programming language without really understanding how what we're using works. So the first thing is the internet. We use it every day, but not many of us actually understand how it works. So it's really important to understand how domain names work, how DNS works, and how to host a website. It always surprises me the number of developers that don't know how to do simple things like hosting a website. Having a developer blog is a really useful way of documenting all of the things that you're learning, and it can really help your career as well. Next up, we have version control. Every developer should understand Git and how to use it. There are other version control systems out there, but quite frankly, in my opinion, you don't need to know any others other than Git. I've also included a section here on getting help. Everyone needs help from time to time, even senior developers, and it's important to know what tools you have available to do that. I've included ChatGPT here. I've been using it for the last couple of months and it is really useful, and at the moment it's free as well. And of course we have GitHub Copilot, which does cost a monthly fee, but it's really useful for helping with things like writing unit tests or debugging your code. I think AI assistants are going to become more and more important to a developer's workflow. But for now, we also have things like Google and Stack Overflow to help you find solutions to your problems. Even senior developers have to Google for solutions, but it does get quicker. You do get better at what you need to search for each time. Moving on, it's important to understand the fundamentals of software development. So I've included things like data types and data structures that you need to know. I haven't included algorithms here because they're really not that important, especially to begin with. What is important is understanding the different data structures that you can use and when you should be using them. I've also included a section on computers with everything that I think you should know. So things like threads and concurrency, input and output, and even memory management. If you're interested in how memory is managed in your code and where all your variables are stored, it's worth checking out my video on stack versus heap as well. Next up, we have Linux terminal commands, which can be really useful to help you become a more efficient developer. I've tried to make this roadmap as language agnostic as possible. Really, the language you pick is becoming less and less important, especially with things like ChatGPT, which can just generate code for you in any language. What is important is understanding the fundamentals as well as the design principles for building software. When it comes to picking a language though, I have included a few recommendations. So if you want to become a backend developer, I recommend using either C# or JavaScript or TypeScript. There are of course other programming languages out there that would be useful for backend developers, but this is just my personal opinion on what I think companies are using as well as the languages that I've got experience with. So next up, we have the main coding principles that I think every developer should know. So we have Solid, Kiss, Dry, Yagni. All of these can help you write more maintainable code. When it comes to developing APIs, you need to understand about routing, authentication, validation, and all those sorts of things. APIs are a core component for backend development, so it's really important that you understand everything you can about them. Next up, we have relational databases. So it's important you understand how to design a database. So understanding things like normalization and indexes, as well as how to write store procedures, and of course, how to write SQL. The SQL database that you use doesn't really matter. Once you've used one, you can pretty much use all of them. They've only got very subtle differences between their SQL syntax. If you're planning on using databases in your application, then you're going to need a way of interacting with them. The way we do that is with ORMs, which tend to be very language specific. For C#, we have things like Entity Framework and Dapper, or if you're using TypeScript, you can use TypeORM or Sequelize. If you're going to be developing software in teams, it's important to know about the different development processes, such as Scrum and Kanban. You will probably pick up a lot of this on the job, but it's important to know the differences. Moving on, we have NoSQL databases, which are really important for scalability, and these are the ones that I think you should probably learn. Then we have things like logging and caching, which you need to understand, and of course, testing. Unit testing is the one that most developers are familiar with, but there's also things like integration testing and performance testing that developers should know about. I recently did a video on the 5 types of testing that every developer should know, so make sure you check that out as well. Now moving on to deploying your application, we have CI/CD and all the various tools that I think you should know. Out of these, I'm most familiar with GitHub Actions, TeamCity, Octopus, and Jenkins. But there are other tools such as GitLab, which is supposed to be very good. Now, next up, we have cloud infrastructure. Now, there's quite a few different options available, but the main ones that I've used are Azure and AWS. There's also things like Google Cloud, but I haven't used it personally, so I'm not going to recommend it to you. In this roadmap, I've included some of the key services that I think you should know, but it's also worth familiarizing yourself with all the different options that they have. There are many different ways to host your application in the cloud, but I would personally recommend using containerization with Docker. Each of the cloud platforms does have its own way of hosting Docker containers, but if you want a platform agnostic way of doing things, it's worth learning Kubernetes. Moving on, we have design patterns that I think you should know about, so things like the Gang of Four patterns and domain-driven design. You should also understand the main software architecture patterns, so things like serverless, monoliths, and microservices. And again, I recently did a video on the differences between monoliths and microservices, so make sure you check that out as well. Now, moving on to slightly more advanced stuff, it's not critical that you know these, but there can be useful things to understand. So for APIs, you can use things like gRPC instead of HTTP to make communications a bit more performant. There's also things like GraphQL and real-time communication protocols that are worth knowing. It's becoming more and more important that you know more than just how to write code. You need to understand a bit of monitoring and DevOps as well. On the monitoring side, these are the tools that I've used the most. So you have Prometheus and Grafana. Grafana is great for getting some visual dashboards of all of your applications. And of course, we have things like Datadog if you want a SaaS option. And there's also the Elk stack, so Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. And on the DevOps side of things, it's important you understand infrastructure as code. So how to deploy your infrastructure programmatically using things like Terraform or Pulumi. And generally to deploy that infrastructure, you use things like Spacelift or Terraform Cloud, but I have seen people use Jenkins in the past as well. I've put a link to this roadmap in the description. It is interactive. You can click on the different items and it will give you more information. I will be expanding it over time and adding more details, so don't forget to bookmark it. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit that like button. It really helps with the algorithm, and I will see you in the next video.